everyone. A while back I started experimenting with baking bread, and I had been baking just a regular French loaf using King Arthur flour's recipe. And then I started to add flavors to the bread. And the type of bread that everybody seems to love is my jalapeno cheese bread. So I want to do this video also to show my friend Rosalia, who is always asking me to make this bread and send it to her, so that hopefully she can make it herself. So the first thing you want to start with is what you call a Poolish. And so what a Poolish is a cheater sourdough starter. Of course, when you're dealing with sourdough, you have to nurture your starter, you have to feed it all the time, and that can be quite time consuming. And so the purpose of a Poolish is to give you a product that's similar to a starter. It might not have the total flavor of a starter that's been around forever, but it does the trick. So earlier in the day, it's about 6 o'clock now. Earlier in the day, I mixed together about a half teaspoon of instant yeast, a cup and a half of bread flour, and 1 cup of lukewarm water. So I mixed that all together, and then I covered it and let it sit. So normally when I'm baking bread, I usually start the Poolish the night before. You can let it sit for up to 16 to 18 hours. After a certain point, it gets a little funky, so you should throw it out. But I decided that I wanted to do this today because I had some jalapenos, I wanted to use them up, so that's why we're here. So the first thing you do is you take a look at the Poolish and you stir it down. So you've got that gummy texture here, and the smell that's coming off of it, you can smell the yeasty smell, the fermentation. That's really going to add flavor to your bread. And since I'm making jalapeno cheese bread, then I will be adding jalapenos to this, as well as a bit more flour and a bit more yeast. But what I want to say about jalapenos, so at least in Bangkok, I'm finding that the jalapenos are not very consistent. I buy a package and sometimes they're not very spicy. So really what you have to do, and this can be painful sometimes, is to actually take a slice and eat it and check to see if it's spicy. This one is not too bad. Dave's smiling. I think he's hoping that I got a real killer jalapeno, but I didn't. So this one's not too spicy. I've already pre-tasted 5 jalapenos to look for. I was looking for a good amount of kick with these jalapenos, and I put them in my tiny food processor. So I'll be adding these into the mix, as well as about 3/4 of a teaspoon of instant yeast. And I've mixed in to this 1 cup of lukewarm water, a tablespoon of salt. I'm using sea salt non-iodized, as well as a tablespoon of cane sugar, which is why it has this dark color. The reason why I dissolved it into the water is because my cane sugar is actually quite lumpy, so I don't want to have those clumps in my mix. So you start adding all this together. Doesn't look pretty in the beginning for sure. And then I'm going to add in my 5 jalapenos. And if you don't have a mixer, of course, you can finely chop. The only thing I'd say is just be careful when you're dealing with chilies to not touch your eyes or other sensitive areas if you're dealing with the chilies. Wearing gloves is often recommended. That's why I try and save myself that pain and use a tiny food processor. So I'm mixing all of the sort of liquid ingredients together. Move this out of the way. And then we start to add in our flour. And what I've done here is I've measured 4 cups of bread flour into a container. And we're going to add approximately 3.5 cups into the liquid, just to try and make a loose dough to start. And the thing about baking and making bread is that it really depends on your environment. So it does take practice and experience, because you'll have more or less moisture depending on where you live. You'll also have differences depending on altitude. So I'm going to add in, so far I've only added in about 3 cups. So I'm going to go to about 3.5, and then I'm going to stop and let the mixture sit. If you let the mixture sit for about 15 minutes, then the flour will absorb that moisture, and you will be able to add a little bit less flour to the final dough, which allows for more bubbles and more rising in the dough. So you do want to let it sit just to allow this mixture just to come together. And I think we're at that point where we're going to let it sit for 15 minutes. So here we are. It's not pretty yet, but it will be, I promise you. And we'll come back in about 15 minutes and add some more flour and make the dough. So we've let our dough sit for about 15 minutes. And it's actually come together a bit more in that time, but of course we're going to need to add a bit more flour so that it's not a sticky mess. It's at this point, because I'm going to be kneading at the same time, then I will want to add in a bit of cheese. So what I have here is extra old cheddar. For aesthetic reasons, you might want to get an orange cheddar. Some people prefer to see that, but I'm just using more like a white cheddar. So I'll mix that in. This is probably about 2.5 cups. I went a little crazy with the grating today. And so this is a bit of a heavy bread, but don't worry, it is really delicious because of that. And this is where I start adding in the rest of my flour and just trying to pull this mixture together. So while you're kneading, you're trying to also incorporate the cheese into the dough. And of course, it's quite sticky at this point, so we're going to have to add some more flour. But so far, I'm just trying to make sure that my cheese is incorporated into the dough. So it's a bit of a messy process. Trying to get all those bits to be a ball. Adding even more flour. Now, this, like I said, is based on King Arthur Flour's recipe for French country style bread. Because we've added the jalapenos in the original recipe, it says up to 4 cups of flour, but the jalapenos do add moisture. So I feel that even if you need to add a bit more flour than what's in the original recipe, which they say maximum of 4 cups, that's completely okay. And this is where we're getting to the max of the 4 cups. And I will likely still add in a bit more flour. Now, normally the recipes call for turning this out onto a surface. I actually find it's a lot more convenient to try and do my kneading in the bowl. It just keeps everything together, just a bit neater. And then when I feel that the dough has come together, then I will eventually turn this out to a greased bowl and then let this mixture rise. And this is going to give us two loaves of bread. So I need to knead this for another 10 minutes. So I'm not going to put you through that with watching me do this, but I'll knead this for another 10 minutes. And then I'll turn this out onto a greased bowl, but I'll let you see what it looks like before, because then we'll let it rise. Okay, so we're about ready now to put our dough into a greased bowl, and then we'll just cover it and let it rise for a couple of hours. So we've got some olive oil here, pouring this into the bowl, and then moving the dough from one bowl to another and turning it over so that it's greased on all sides. And then I'm going to put some cling wrap on this and let it sit for a couple of hours, and you'll see that this mass is going to rise to about double. So we'll come back when it does that. So we're back now, and our dough has been rising for 2 hours. To help it along, I actually put it outside because it was a pretty warm day today with all the pollution. And you'll see as I start touching it a bit, it starts to deflate. So what I usually try and do is turn the dough out onto the actual plastic that I had covered it on, trying to save at least washing some dishes. Okay, I almost got it all there. And then we're going to cut it into 2 pieces and form them into balls, or what we call as a boule. So I've got 2 pieces of parchment paper here. So this process is, and it takes a little bit of practice, you gather up your dough ball from all of the cut sides and try and gather from the bottom the dough and flip it over. And then what I do here is I try and make it a bit more compact. So that's one. We'll do it again. Once again, gathering again, especially the cut side. Okay, now that we've gathered all of the edges up, this one looks also still like an edge, so I'm still going to grab that. And then I grab it and flip it and just try and make it compact. And I'd say your hands are like cupped together, because what you're trying to do is keep it together so it's more like a shape like that. In fact, with this first one, if you're not happy with the shape, you can always do the process over again. Gather up, flip it over, shape again. I see over here I've got a little bit of a seam and I'm not totally happy with that, so I will gently do the process again until I get a shape of a perfect round ball, gathering all of the edges up to the top and then flipping it over. And there we go. So now we have 2 round boules, which I will cover with a bit of plastic wrap, and then I'm going to let these rise again. So they're going to rise for, it's 45 to 90 minutes. You want it to be about 40% bigger, and then we'll be able to bake. So in this time, I have a pizza stone in the oven, and we're going to start at about 450 degrees and bring it down to 400 and then let it bake for about 30 minutes each loaf. But for now, we're going to let this rise, so we'll come back when the loaves are ready. Okay, so it's been about 45 minutes, and rather than cover my bread with plastic wrap, I just decided to put a bowl on top. We still have one other step to do, which is scoring the bread. So I usually do it with a very sharp knife. Little crisscross pattern here, maybe some little small cuts here. All right. And then we have our oven, very, very hot oven at 450 to even 475. And then we throw this into the oven on top of the pizza stone. And using a little spray bottle, just mist into the oven. So now I'm going to turn the oven down to around 210, which is about 400 degrees. And then for the first 15 minutes or so, I'll go back in every few minutes just to spritz the bread. What we're aiming for is kind of a crispy outside and a soft, chewy texture. And this is probably going to go for about, I'm going to check on it in about 25 minutes. Usually with loaves of this size, 25 to 30 minutes is plenty. But because this bread has a bit more moisture with the jalapenos, with the cheese, sometimes you really want to make sure it's really nice and brown and it's cooked all the way through. So we'll come back when we have elapsed 25 to 30 minutes, and then you can see the final product. Yeah, we'll be back in half an hour. Okay, so we're back, and I baked both of the loaves, but the first loaf has been cooling for about an hour. The second loaf is a little bit more compact. I had reshaped it just because it was going to proof for longer, and I baked it a little longer. But just wanted to end with showing you guys the inside. So you end up with a loaf that's got like a bunch of little holes inside, and then you've got the jalapeno interspersed. The cheese generally gets incorporated into the bread. And I'm just gonna try just a small piece. It's 10:30 at night right now. I've been like pretty much cooking all day, but so this one, with the jalapenos I used, it doesn't have as much of a bite as some of the other loaves I've done, even though I used 5 jalapenos for these 2 loaves. But it still has that beautiful jalapeno flavor, and you get the cheese all throughout. The bread is like, it's got some chew to it, but you've got the crispy outside. It's just a beautiful bread. So if you're willing, try this at home. This bread freezes beautifully. What I usually do is I'll cut it up, I'll slice it, put it in the freezer, and then when we have guests over, I'll just take it out, put it in the toaster, and offer them some of this bread with some beautiful butter, and it makes just the perfect snack. So jalapeno cheese bread. Enjoy.